Hey guys, we're back with Maniac Magee. We are on chapter 4, so if you haven't watched the first part in this series, you might want to go back and check that video out. We are picking it right up. Jeffrey just ran into this girl named Amanda, and he convinced her to let her borrow a book, even though they've never met. He just got her address. That's where we're at. Alright. Jeffrey made 3 other appearances that first day. The first came at one of the high school fields during 11th grade gym class. Most of the students were playing soccer, but about a dozen were playing football because they were on varsity and the gym teacher happened to be the football coach. The star quarterback, Brian Dennehy, wound up and threw a 60-yarder to his favorite receiver, James Hands Down, who was streaking a fly pattern down the sideline. But the ball never quite reached Hands. Just as he was about to cradle it in his big brown loving mitts, it vanished. By the time he recovered from the shock, a little kid was weaving upfield through the varsity football players. Nobody laid a paw on him. When the kid got down to the soccer field, he turned and punted the ball. It sailed back over the up-looking gym classers, spiraled more perfectly than anything Brian Dennehy had ever thrown, and landed in the outstretched hands of still-stunned Hands Down. Then the kid ran off. There was one other thing, something that all of them saw but no one believed until they compared notes after school that day. Up until the punt, the kid had done everything with one hand. He had to, because in his other hand was a book. Chapter 5. Later on that day, there was a commotion in the West End, at 803 Oriole Street to be exact, at the backyard of 803 Oriole to be exacter. This, of course, was the infamous address of Finsterwald. Kids stayed away from Finsterwalds the way old people stay away from Saturday afternoon matinees at a $2 movie theater. And what would happen to a kid who didn't stay away? That was a question best left unanswered. Suffice it to say that occasionally, even today, if some poor, raggedy, nicotine-stained wretch is seen shuffling through town, word will spread that this once was a bright, happy, normal child who had the misfortune of blundering onto Finsterwald's property. That's why, if you valued your life, you never chased a ball into Finsterwald's background. Finsterwald's backyard was a graveyard of tennis balls and baseballs and footballs and frisbees and model airplanes and one-way boomerangs. That's why his front steps were the only unsat-on front steps in town. And why no paper kid would ever deliver there. And why no kid on a snow day would ever shovel that sidewalk, not for $1 zillion. So, it was late afternoon, and screams were coming from Finsterwald. Who? What? Why? The screamer was a boy whose name's lost to us, for after this day he disappears from the pages of history. We believe he was about 10 years old. Let's call him Arnold Jones. Arnold Jones was being hoisted into the air above the Finsterwald's backyard fence. The hoisters were 3 or 4 high school kids. This was one of the things they did for fun. Arnold Jones had apparently forgotten one of the cardinal rules of survival in the West End. Never let yourself be near Finsterwalds and high school kids at the same time. So there's Arnold Jones held up by all these hands, flopping and kicking and shrieking like some poor Aztec human sacrifice about to be tossed off a pyramid. No! No! Please! He pleads. Please! So, of course, they do it. The high schoolers dump him into the yard, and now they back off, no longer laughing, just watching the back door of the house, the windows, the dark green shades. As for Arnold Jones, he clams up the instant he hits the ground. He's on his knees now, all hunched and puckered. His eyes goggle at the back door, at the doorknob. He's paralyzed. A mouse in front of the yawning maw of a python. Now, after a minute or two of breathless silence, one of the high schoolers thinks he hears something. He whispers, "Listen." Another one hears it. A faint, tiny noise. A rattling. A chittering, a chattering, and getting louder. Yes, chattering teeth. Arnold Jones's teeth. They're chattering like snare drums. And now, as if his mouth isn't big enough to hold the chatter, the rest of his body joins in. First, it's a buzz-like trembling, and then the shakes, and finally it's as if every bone inside of him is clamoring to get out. A high schooler squawks, "He's got the Finsterwallies! Yeah, yeah, they yell, and they stand there cheering and clapping. Years later, the high schoolers' accounts differ. One says the kid from nowhere hopped the fence, hopped it without ever laying a hand on it to boost himself over. Another says the kid just opened the back gate and strolled on in. Another swears it was a mirage, some sort of hallucination, possibly caused by evil emanations surrounding 803 Oriole Street. Real or not, they all saw the same kid, not much bigger than Arnold Jones. Scraggly, raggedy, flap-soled sneakers, book in one hand. They saw him walk right up to Arnold, and they saw Arnold look up at him and faint dead away. Such a bad case of the Finsterwallies did Arnold have that his body kept shaking for a half minute after he conked out. The Phantom Samaritan stuck the book between his teeth, crouched down, hoisted Arnold Jones's limp carcass over his shoulder, and hauled him out like a sack of flour. Unfortunately, he chose to put Arnold down at the one spot in town as bad as Finsterwald's backyard, namely, Finsterwald's front steps. When Arnold came to and discovered this, he took off like a horsefly from a swatter. As the stupefied high schoolers were leaving the scene, they looked back. They saw the kid, cool times 10, stretched out on the forbidden steps and opened his book to read. Chapter 6. About an hour later, Mrs. Valerie Pickwell twanged open her back screen door, stood on the step, and whistled. As whistles go, Mrs. Pickwell's was one of the all-time greats. It reeled in every Pickwell kid for dinner every night. Never was a Pickwell kid ever late for dinner. It's a record that will probably stand forever. The whistle wasn't loud, wasn't screechy, but to the ears of a Pickwell kid, it was magic. Somehow it had the ability to slip through the slush of 5 o'clock noises to reach its targets. So, from the dump, from the creek, from the tracks, from Red Hill, it ran the Pickwell kids for dinner, all 10 of them. And to that, the parents, baby Dee Dee, grandmother and grandfather Pickwell, great-grandfather Pickwell, and a down-and-out taxi driver whom Mr. Pickwell was helping out. The Pickwells were always helping someone out. All that, and you had what Mrs. Pickwell called her small nation. Only a ping-pong table was big enough to seat them all, and that's what they ate around. Dinner was spaghetti. In fact, every third night dinner was spaghetti. When dinner was over and they were all bringing their dirty dishes to the kitchen, Dominic Pickwell said to Duke Pickwell, "Who's that kid?" "What kid?" said Duke. "The kid next to you at the table." I don't know. I thought Donald knew him." "I don't know him," said Donald. "I thought Dion knew him." "Never saw him," said Dion. "I figured he was Deirdre's new boyfriend." Deirdre kicked Dion in the shins. Duke checked back in the dining room. "He's gone." The Pickwell kids dashed out the back door to the top of Rako Hill. They scanned the railroad tracks. There he was, passing Red Hill, a book in his hand. He was running, passing the spear field now, and the Pickwell kids had to blink and squint and shade their eyes to make sure they were seeing right. Because the kid wasn't running the cinders alongside the tracks or on the wooden ties. No, he was running, where the Pickwells themselves, where every other kid had only ever walked, on the steel rail itself. Chapter 7. When Jeffrey Magee was next spotted, it was at the Little League field in the park. A Little League game had just ended. The Red Sox had won, but the big story was John McNabb, who struck out 16 batters to set a new 2 Mills LL record. McNabb was a giant. He stood 5 feet 8 and was said to weigh over 170 pounds. He had to bring his birth certificate in to the league director to prove he was only 12. And still, most people didn't believe it. The point is, the rest of the league was no match for McNabb. It wouldn't have been so bad if he was a right fielder, but he was a pitcher, and there was only one pitch he ever threw, a fastball. Most of the batters never saw it. They just heard it whizzing past their noses. You could see their knees shaking from the stands. One poor kid stood there long enough to hear strike one go past, and then threw up all over home plate. It was still pretty light out, because when there are a lot of strikeouts, a game goes fast. McNabb was still on the mound, even though the official game was over. He figured he'd made baseball history, and he wanted to stretch it out as long as he could. There were still about 10 players around, Red Soxers and Green Soxers, and McNabb was making them march up to the plate and take their swings. There was no catcher. The ball just zoomed to the backstop. When a kid struck out, he went back to the end of the line. McNabb was loving it. After each whiff, he laughed and bellowed the strikeout total. 26. Whoosh, 27. Whoosh, 28. He was like a shark. He had the bloodlust. The victims were hunched and trembling, walking the gangplank. 34. Whoosh, 35. Whoosh. And then somebody new stepped up to the plate. Just a punky, runty little kid. No Red Sox or Green Sox uniform. Kind of scraggly. With a book, which he laid down on home plate. He scratched out a footing in the batter's box, cocked the bat on his shoulder, and stared at McNabb. McNabb croaked from the mound. "Get out of here, runt! This is a Little League record. You ain't in Little League." The kid walked away. Was he chickening out? No, he was lifting a red cap from the next batter in line. He put it on. He was back in the box. McNabb almost fell off the mound. He was laughing so hard. "Okay, runt. Number 36 coming up." McNabb fired. The kid swung. The batters in line automatically turned their eyes to the backstop where the ball should be, but it wasn't there. It was in the air, riding on a beeline right out to McNabb's head, and the same line it came in on, only faster. McNabb froze, then flinched just in time. The ball missed his head but nipped the bill of his cap and sent it spinning like a flying saucer out to shortstop. The ball landed in the second base dust and rolled all the way out to the fence in center field. Dead silence. Nobody moved. McNabb was gaping at the kid, who was still standing there all calm and cool, waiting for the next pitch. Finally, a sort of grin slithered across McNabb's lips. He roared, "Get my hat! Get the ball!" 10 kids scrambled onto the field, bringing him the hat and ball. McNabb had it figured now. He was so busy laughing at the runt, he must have lobbed him a lollipop, and the runt got lucky and pulled it. This time, McNabb wasn't laughing. He fingered the ball, tips digging into the red stitching. He wound up, he fired. He thought, "Man, that sucker's going so fast, even I can hardly see it." And then he looked up, turned, followed the flight of the ball, which finally came down to earth in deep left center field and bounced out to the fence. More silence, except from someone who yelled, "Yip!" then caught himself. "Ball!" bellowed McNabb. He was handed the ball. He slammed his hat to the ground. His nostrils flared. He was breathing like a picador bull. He windmilled, reared, lunged, and fired. This time the ball cleared the fence on the fly. No more holding back. The other kids cheered. Somebody ran for the ball. They were anxious now for more. 3 more pitches, 3 more home runs. Pandemonium on the sidelines. It was raining red and green hats. McNabb couldn't stand it. The next time he threw, it was right at the kid's head. The kid ducked. McNabb called, "Strike 1!" Next pitch headed for the kid's belt. The kid bent his stomach around the ball. "Strike 2!" Strike 3 took dead aim at the kid's knees, and here was the kid swooping back and at the same time swatting at the ball like a golfer teeing off. It was the craziest baseball swing you ever saw, but there was the ball smoking out to center field. "Hold it, runt," snarled McNabb. "I can't pitch right when I got a whiz." The kids on the sidelines made way as McNabb stomped off the field past the dugout and into the woods behind the field and the creek. They waited a pretty long time, but they figured, well, McNabb's piss probably probably lasted a lot longer than a regular kid's. Might even make a creek rinse. At last, McNabb was back on the mound, fingering the ball in his glove, a demon's gleam in his eye. He wound up, fired, the ball headed for home plate, and what's this? A leg ball? It's got legs, long legs, pinwheeling towards the plate. It wasn't a ball at all, it was a frog, and McNabb was on the mound, cackling away, and the kid at the plate was bug-eyed. Nobody'd ever tried to hit a fast frog before. So what did the kid do? He bunted it. He bunted the frog, laid down a perfect bunt in front of the plate, third base side, and took off for first. He was halfway to second before McNabb jolted himself into action. The kid was trying for an inside-the-park home run bunt, the rarest feat in baseball, something that had hardly ever been done with a ball, let alone never with a frog. And to be the pitcher who let such a thing happen? Well, McNabb could already feel his strikeout record fading to a mere grain in the sandlot of history. So he lumbered off the mound after the frog, which was now hopping down the third baseline. As a matter of fact, it was so close to the line that McNabb had a brilliant idea. Just heard the frog across the line, it would be a foul ball, or foul frog, which is what he tried to do with his foot. But the frog, instead of taking a left turn at the shoe, jumped over it and hopped toward third base. He was heading for the green fields of left, and the runt kid, sounding like two runners with his flap soles slapping the bottoms of his feet, was chucking dust for third. Only one hope now. McNabb had to grab the frog and tag the runner out. But now the frog shot through his legs, over to the mound, and now towards shortstop, and now towards second, and McNabb was lurching and lunging, throwing his hat at the frog, throwing his glove, and everybody was screaming. And the kid was rounding third and digging for home. And unbefroggable, the ball was heading for home too. The ball, the batter, the pitcher, all racing for home plate. And it was the batter, the new kid out of nowhere, who crossed the plate first. At the same time, scooping up his book, twirling his borrowed red cap back to the cheering others, and jogging on past the empty stands and up the hill to the boulevard. McNabb gasped, croaking after him, "Don't stop till you're out of town, runt! Don't let me ever catch ya!" And that's how Jeffrey Magee knocked the world's first frog ball for a 4-bagger. Alright guys, we're going to stop the video there. We're going to pick up with Chapter 8 on the next one. So if you would like to be notified when I upload the video, go ahead and hit subscribe. I'll see you later.